Hello, everyone. Today's topic is urban planning. Yes, I am talking about planning. I am not talking about a piece of paper. I am talking about planning. If you make a plan, stick with it. Do not excuse. Do not take bribes. Anyway, stay tuned and stay safe.
Okay, so you want to do a deep dive into climate resilient cities. Looks like we've got a whole bunch of sources here, articles, case studies, even some history thrown in.
Yeah, we do.
By the time we're done with this, you're going to be like a walking encyclopedia of how cities can deal with, well, not just survive, but actually thrive in the face of climate change. Pretty cool.
I think so.
All right, so let's jump in. Right off the bat, what really struck me was, the sources paint a pretty clear picture of the scale of the challenge here. We're talking about billions of people, right?
Billions.
Living in urban areas that are increasingly vulnerable to all this stuff. Rising temperatures, extreme weather events, rising sea levels, you name it.
It's true. One of the sources I was looking at mentioned that over 2 billion city dwellers could be facing at least a ½ degree Celsius temperature increase by 2040.
Wow.
And that's on top of the heat island effect that cities already experience.
I was going to say, it's not like cities are exactly cool to begin with, right? Even without climate change.
Exactly. So things are definitely heating up, both literally and figuratively.
Okay, so we've got the human impact, but let's not forget about the economic side of this. Because one of the sources mentioned that we need something like, what was it, $4.5 to $5.4 trillion annually to make cities climate resilient globally. That's a mind-boggling number.
It is, and the current investments are falling far short.
Oh yeah, like way short.
Yeah, significantly. Right now, global financing for climate adaptation is only at about $831 billion annually.
So we're missing, what, trillions of dollars?
Pretty much.
Well, that's a little concerning, to say the least.
It is a challenge, no doubt about it. But the good news is there are some incredible innovations and success stories out there.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because going through these sources, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Some cities are really stepping up and doing some amazing things, like Freiburg, Germany, for example. They've kind of become the poster child for sustainability, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. Freiburg is often called the Green City for a reason. They've really embraced renewable energy, green roofs, efficient public transport. They've even involved the community in shaping a lot of their green initiatives.
So it's not just top-down policies, they're actually empowering residents to be part of the solution.
Exactly. And it's been remarkably effective. Freiburg has significantly reduced its carbon footprint and become a model for other cities looking to go green.
Another city that caught my eye was Medellin, Colombia. They've done some amazing things with urban design, but what really stood out was that cable car system they built to connect marginalized neighborhoods to the city center.
Ah, yes.
Metro cable.
Yeah, the metro cable, it's brilliant. It's not just transportation, right? It's about giving people access to opportunities, to jobs, to services. That's what we're talking about when we say climate resilience has to be equitable.
I agree. Medellin shows how climate resilience and social equity can and should go hand in hand. Okay, so we've talked about some inspiring cities. Now let's dig into some of the specific strategies they're using. One thing that kept popping up in the sources was this idea of green infrastructure. Like the magic bullet or something, isn't it?
Well, it's definitely a powerful tool.
But I think people sometimes get the wrong idea. They think it's just about making cities look pretty,
Yeah, there's definitely more to it than that.
So break it down for us.
Right.
What is green infrastructure, and how does it actually make a city more resilient to climate change?
Sure. So green infrastructure is essentially about using natural elements to, well, enhance a city's resilience. We're talking about things like open forests, green roofs, permeable pavements.
So it's about working with nature, not against it.
Exactly.
I can dig it. But how does that translate into real resilience, like on the ground?
So let's take urban forests, for example. They provide shade, which can significantly cool the air, especially important with that whole heat island effect we were talking about.
Makes sense.
And then green roofs act like sponges. They absorb rainwater, which helps to reduce stormwater runoff and prevent flooding.
And less runoff means less strain on the city's drainage systems,
Yeah.
right? Which, let's face it, are often already overtaxed as it is.
Precisely.
Okay, what about permeable pavements?
Permeable pavements allow water to seep into the ground, which helps to replenish groundwater supplies. Again, take some of the pressure off those drainage systems.
So it's like we're using nature to kind of solve the problems that we create in the first place.
In a way, yes. It's about recognizing the power of natural systems and integrating them into our urban environments.
I like it. Pretty elegant solution.
It can be. But there are, of course, challenges. With any large-scale initiative, there are always going to be some bumps in the road.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it can't all be sunshine and roses, right?
Right. And one of the biggest challenges that the sources highlight is this issue of green gentrification.
Oh, right. Now, that's a term I've heard thrown around, but I'm not sure I fully understand it.
So basically, green gentrification is when green initiatives like creating parks or planting trees end up driving up property values and displacing lower-income residents.
Oh, I see. So it's like you're trying to do something good for the environment, but it ends up having these unintended social consequences.
Exactly. It's a complex issue, and it highlights the need to make sure that these initiatives are inclusive and benefit everyone, not just a select few.
So the balancing act, right?
It is. We need to find ways to make cities greener and more resilient without pushing people out of their homes.
Okay, so that's green gentrification, but there's another elephant in the room, isn't there? And that's the money.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about that earlier, about that massive gap between what we need to invest and what's actually being invested.
Right.
Trillions of dollars, if I recall correctly.
Mm.
How do we even begin to bridge that gap, especially in, less wealthy regions? That seems like a pretty big hurdle.
It is a significant challenge. One approach that's gaining traction is this idea of blended finance models, where public and private funds are leveraged together.
Interesting. So it's about getting everyone to chip in.
Exactly. We also need to prioritize investments in nature-based solutions because those often provide a greater return on investment compared to traditional infrastructure projects.
Makes sense. Work with nature, not against it.
Right. And of course, we need stronger international cooperation to support developing countries in their climate adaptation efforts.
Yeah, everyone needs to be on board if we're going to tackle this thing.
I agree.
Going through these sources, I was stressed by how often they mention Bali.
Oh, yes.
It seems like Bali has a lot to teach us about sustainable living.
It does. One of the sources really dives into their traditional Trihita Karana philosophy, which emphasizes the importance of harmony between humans, nature, and the divine.
So it's about recognizing the interconnectedness of everything.
Exactly. And this philosophy really aligns with the principles of sustainable urban development. It's about respecting the environment, fostering social harmony, and finding a balance between material progress and spiritual well-being.
That sounds beautiful, but isn't there a bit of a contradiction? Because another source pointed out that Bali is facing some serious challenges from rapid, unplanned development, especially in its tourism areas.
Great.
So it's like they have this amazing philosophy, but the reality on the ground is a bit different.
Unfortunately, yes. And it just highlights the tension that exists between economic development and environmental preservation. A lot of regions are struggling with that.
It's a tough balancing act, that's for sure.
It is.
Okay, so we've talked about the global picture, but let's bring it back home for a second. I think it's easy to get caught up in these big concepts and forget that climate change is already impacting our daily lives in very real ways.
It is.
And cities are on the front lines of these impacts.
They are. And it's only going to get more intense in the coming years.
I mean, just think about it. More frequent storms, more flooding, more extreme heat. These things can disrupt our commutes, damage our homes, even affect our workplaces.
And in the long term, rising sea levels could displace entire coastal communities. That's a very real possibility we need to be prepared for.
It's a sobering thought, but it's also why this whole conversation about climate-resilient cities is so important. It's not just about protecting our cities from some future threat. It's about creating a more sustainable and livable future for all of us, right here, right now.
Absolutely. And it's not just about reacting to these threats. It's about proactively planning for a future that's going to be very different from the present. It's exciting to see what the future holds for climate-resilient cities. We're not just talking about survival here, but using these challenges to build better cities, more livable, equitable, and sustainable.
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it. Not doom and gloom, but an opportunity to really reimagine what cities can be.
Exactly. And it's happening on so many different levels. Take green infrastructure, for example. More and more cities are embracing things like parks, green roofs, and urban forests as key parts of their climate resilience strategies.
Yeah, it's amazing how something as simple as planting a tree can make a big difference. Cooling a city, cleaning the air, even helping to manage stormwater runoff. It's like we're rediscovering the power of nature, right?
And it goes beyond that. Along with green infrastructure, we're also seeing the rise of smart city technologies, things like sensors, data analytics, and AI, all being used to make cities more responsive and efficient.
Now that sounds futuristic. Cities that can adapt in real time to whatever comes their way.
Exactly. Imagine a city that can adjust traffic flow during a heat wave or activate flood defenses when heavy rain is detected. That's the kind of smart technology we're talking about.
It's pretty amazing stuff, but it also makes me think about the potential downsides. What if there's a cyber attack or a system failure? What happens if the power grid goes down during a major storm? Doesn't all this technology make a city more vulnerable in some ways?
That's a really important point. Any technology has its risks, and we have to be careful about not becoming overly reliant on it. Cybersecurity, data privacy, system resilience, those are all things we need to consider very carefully as we integrate these technologies.
No, it's all about balance.
Yeah.
So technology is one piece of the puzzle, but we can't forget about the human element. I mean, climate resilience isn't just about buildings and gadgets, right? It's about people.
Absolutely. And that's where community engagement comes in. We need to empower communities to have a say in how their cities adapt to climate change.
I think the sources did a great job of highlighting this, actually. They talked about some key historical events that have really shaped our understanding of climate adaptation. One that stuck out to me was the 1997-98 Southeast Asian haze crisis, a pretty stark reminder of how closely linked environmental issues and land use practices are to climate change.
Yeah, that haze crisis was a real wake-up call for the whole region. All those forest fires caused by drought conditions and unsustainable land clearing, they had a huge impact on public health, the economy, even international relations.
And it wasn't just a local problem, right? The haze spread across borders, affecting multiple countries, shows you just how interconnected we all are when it comes to climate change.
Absolutely. And then there was the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. Devastating event, obviously. But it also showed us how vulnerable coastal communities are to natural disasters, especially with climate change, making those events more frequent and intense.
The tsunami really highlighted the importance of disaster preparedness, early warning systems, and coastal management. Things that can help to reduce the impact of these disasters when they do happen.
And those lessons are more important than ever as sea levels continue to rise.
Okay, so we talked about the challenges, the innovations, some historical lessons. Now let's get into some of the specific strategies for making cities more climate resilient. I mean, the sources mentioned some really interesting examples like flood-resistant buildings and urban greening projects. Want to dive into those a bit?
Absolutely. There's a lot happening in the field of flood-resistant building technology. We're seeing innovative designs that incorporate things like elevated foundations, flood-proof materials, even floating structures in some cases.
Floating buildings. That
Yeah.
sounds pretty wild. But I guess it makes sense if you're trying to adapt to rising sea levels.
It's really impressive what architects and engineers are coming up with. And then, of course, there's the whole world of urban greening, planting trees, creating parks, integrating green spaces into the city. All of these things can help to reduce the urban heat island effect, manage stormwater runoff, and create a more pleasant and healthy living environment.
You know, it's interesting. People often think of urban greening as just a cosmetic thing, but it's so much more than that. These green spaces play a vital role in a city's overall resilience.
They're essential, and they offer so many benefits, everything from cooling the air to filtering pollutants to providing habitats for wildlife.
And let's not forget the social and psychological benefits, right? Parks and gardens give people a place to connect with nature, to relax, to exercise, to socialize. They're crucial for our well-being, especially in busy, crowded cities.
Couldn't agree more. Access to green spaces has been shown to reduce stress, improve mental health, and even encourage physical activity.
Speaking of which, I wanted to circle back to something we touched on earlier, green gentrification. I think it's such an important issue that it deserves a little more attention. Can you remind us what it is and why it's a concern when we're talking about climate-resilient cities?
Sure. Green gentrification happens when efforts to make a neighborhood greener, like creating new parks or planting trees, end up driving up property values and pushing out lower-income residents.
So it's like trying to do something good for the environment backfires and ends up hurting the very people you're trying to help.
Exactly. It's complex, and it really highlights the need for careful planning and community engagement to ensure that these green initiatives are inclusive and benefit everyone, not just the wealthy. We need to think about things like affordable housing policies, community land trusts, or development models that prioritize the needs of existing residents.
It sounds like equity and social justice really need to be at the heart of any climate adaptation strategy.
I agree. We can't just focus on protecting cities from environmental threats. We need to ensure that the benefits of that protection are shared by all members of the community.
Absolutely. Now, transportation is another big piece of this puzzle. How can we make urban transportation systems more climate resilient and at the same time more equitable?
Well, we're seeing a lot of cities moving away from car-centric models and investing in more sustainable options like public transportation, bike lanes, and pedestrian-friendly streets.
So it's about shifting the focus away from private cars and giving people more choices.
Exactly. Making it easier for people to get around without relying on their cars not only reduces carbon emissions, but also improves air quality, reduces traffic congestion, and makes cities more livable for everyone.
It's fascinating how all of these solutions are interconnected. Improving public transportation not only helps to address climate change, but it also promotes social equity, public health, and a higher quality of life.
It's true, and that's why it's so important to take a holistic approach to urban planning. We need to consider all of these different factors and find solutions that address multiple challenges simultaneously.
Now, speaking of solutions, our sources highlighted some pretty inspiring examples of cities around the world that are already implementing these innovative climate adaptation strategies. Got any favorites you want to share?
Definitely. Rotterdam in the Netherlands is one that stands out. They've been real pioneers in water management and flood protection. They have these innovative water plazas that double as water storage during heavy rainfall. And they're even developing floating neighborhoods and enhancing their flood barriers to adapt to rising sea levels.
Water plazas, huh? Turning a potential problem into an asset. I like that kind of outside-the-box thinking.
It's brilliant. And then there's New York City. After Hurricane Sandy, they've been investing heavily in coastal defenses, elevating critical infrastructure, and improving building codes to make the city more resilient to future storms.
It's encouraging to see cities learning from past disasters and taking steps to prepare for the future.
Absolutely. And New York isn't alone. Cities all over the world are waking up to the need to adapt. From green roofs in Singapore to bike-friendly infrastructure in Copenhagen, there's a global movement gaining momentum.
And it's not just about altruism, right? I mean, more and more people are realizing that climate action and economic growth can go hand in hand.
Definitely. Investing in climate resilience can create jobs, drive innovation, and boost the economy. Think about the development and deployment of new technologies for climate adaptation that could create whole new industries.
So it's not just about spending money to solve a problem. It's about investing in a more sustainable and prosperous future.
Exactly. And businesses are starting to catch on. They're seeing sustainability not just as a moral imperative, but as a smart business strategy.
Right. And speaking of technology, our sources also talked about how crucial it is for climate adaptation. Can you give us some examples of how technology is being used to make cities more resilient?
Technology is really helping cities to monitor climate risks, manage resources more efficiently, and respond more effectively to emergencies. For instance, cities are using sensors and data analytics to monitor rainfall patterns and predict flooding. They're using smart grids to optimize energy consumption and reduce emissions. And they're using early warning systems to alert residents about heat waves or storms.
So technology is helping us to be more proactive and informed in our response to climate change.
Precisely. It's giving us the tools we need to anticipate and manage risks, which is essential for building resilient cities. And as technology continues to advance, we can expect even more innovative solutions to emerge.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation. One of the things that really stood out to me throughout this deep dive is just how interconnected everything is. Climate change, urban planning, social equity, economic development, it's all part of the same story.
Absolutely. We can't address these issues in isolation. We need holistic, integrated solutions that take into account all of these different factors.
So it's not just about building seawalls or planting trees. It's about creating a more just, sustainable, and resilient society as a whole.
Exactly. And that's what makes this conversation so important. It's not just about urban planning. It's about the future of our cities and the well-being of our communities.
Well said. Now, one final question for you. What gives you hope for the future of climate-resilient cities?
What gives me hope is the incredible ingenuity and resilience of the human spirit. We've faced challenges throughout history, and we've always found ways to adapt and overcome. I truly believe we have the knowledge, the technology, and the will to create a more sustainable and resilient future for ourselves and for future generations.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for sharing your insights with us today. It was really inspiring to see how cities all over the world are stepping up to this challenge. They're not just, reacting to what's happening now, but actually trying to shape a better future, for people and the planet. Really cool.
Yeah, I see it as a chance to rethink our cities, to move towards designs that are more in tune with nature, and more focused on human needs, and of course, climate resilient.
We've talked about this a lot today, but it really hit home for me. Climate resilience, it's not just about physical things like stronger buildings or seawalls. It's about building a society that's more just, sustainable, resilient on every level.
Right, exactly. It's a whole new way of thinking about urban design. You have to see how everything connects. Climate change, social equity, the economy, public health, it's all one big system.
Yeah. And sometimes it feels a little overwhelming, to be honest. But then I see all this incredible innovation happening, people working together to find solutions, and it gives me hope.
Me too. This is a really big moment for humanity, and cities are at the forefront. They're showing us that we can adapt, we can overcome these challenges, and we can create a better future for everyone.
One thing that really fascinated me going through these sources was the idea of looking to the past for inspiration. Or we talked about Bali's Trihita Karana philosophy.
Yeah.
But there are so many other examples of indigenous knowledge and traditions that offer valuable insights into sustainable living. We don't always have to reinvent the wheel, right?
That's so true. There's a lot of wisdom out there if we're willing to listen. And it's important to bring those perspectives into our modern approach to urban planning.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. The challenges, the solutions, it's a lot to process. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a question.
Go ahead.
We've talked about the big picture, the global trends, but what about you on the ground? What can you do right now to make your own city more climate resilient?
That's a great question. And honestly, there are so many things people can do, even small things that can make a difference.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, you could attend a city council meeting and speak up about supporting green infrastructure projects, or maybe volunteer with an organization that's working on sustainability in your community, or even just bike to work instead of driving, things like that.
Yeah, every little bit helps.
Yeah.
And when we all do our part, it adds up. Don't underestimate the power of your own actions. You can be part of the solution.
Exactly. Get involved, speak up, make a difference, and never stop learning. This deep dive is just a starting point. There's so much more to explore. Stay curious, stay engaged, and be the change you want to see.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us today on this deep dive into the world of climate-resilient cities. We hope you learned something new and that you're inspired to get involved and help create a more sustainable future for all of us.